Cristina has helped dozens of investors scale their business with the right virtual support, but she's also seen a lot of things go wrong.
I think the top mistake is thinking that hiring one VA can do everything for them.
Essentially thinking of VAs as a magic wand,
as a one-brush solution for the issues and frustrations that you have in your business. If right now you feel very lucky that you're working with a perfect VA, I would start rethinking that. How lucky are you really when your entire business processes rely on just the one VA? Not think of them as the solution. It's not so much that you're hiring VAs to solve problems in your business, but that you hire VAs to operate on solutions.
We're diving into the top 5 mistakes that property investors make when they're hiring VAs. Cristina shares how to fix them so that you get the most out of your time, money, and team. So whether you're hiring your first VA or already have one on board, this is your guide to doing it smarter.
Building wealth through property isn't about chasing big deals and paydays. It's about owning assets that make money for you consistently. But figuring it all out on your own, that's where most people get stuck. That's why we created this Property Life membership. It's everything we wish we had when we started. Expert guidance, real-world case studies, and a private community of investors actually doing deals, not just talking about them. So you could spend years trying to piece it all together yourself, or you could plug into a system that's already working for our community. Check out our membership page at This Property Life. Everything you need to know is right there. Success is a team sport. Come join in.
In this episode of This Property Life, I'm joined by Cristina Osborne, virtual assistant expert, property investor and founder of the Property VA. Cristina has helped dozens of investors scale their business with the right virtual support, but she's also seen a lot of things go wrong. We're diving into the top 5 mistakes that property investors make when they're hiring VAs, from vague briefs to poor onboarding to trying to find the unicorn that can do it all. And Cristina shares how to fix them so that you get the most out of your time, money, and team. So whether you're hiring your first VA or already have one on board, this is your guide to doing it smarter. I'm Sarah Blaney, your host on This Property Life. Let's get into it. Welcome, Cristina.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's my pleasure to be here on the Property Life podcast.
Before we jump in, let's tackle one of the biggest hurdles for property investors: finding the best buy-to-let locations for top returns. Over the years, we've helped countless individuals pinpoint the most profitable locations and maximize their rental income. To make it easier for you, we've put together a free guide to buy-to-let hotspots for 2025, designed specifically for you to understand the market, stay ahead of the trends, and it even includes a list of our top 10 locations in the UK. Get it now for free by clicking the link in the description below and start building your property portfolio today.
It's our pleasure to have you. So your background is property and VAs. So tell me how that started.
So it started by me attending networking meetings and realizing that a lot of property investors actually hire VAs from the Philippines. I wasn't aware of that. I just came into property with my husband back in 2014, and attending property networking meetings opened me and made me discover that for whatever reason back then, which I wasn't aware of, that Filipino virtual assistants were highly in demand for property investors. It wasn't until lockdown happened in 2020 that I ventured into that area myself. I thought that was a really good business to pursue during lockdown. And it was an adjacent business to, back then, property. And I thought, fantastic. I feel like I could be best placed to bridge the gap between the property investors that I already knew and the culture and essentially the source of VAs from the Philippines, where I'm from.
Yeah, of course, because that's the magic bit for you, isn't it? So you've got the property experience, you've been investing for 10 years personally for you and your family. But equally, you understand the cultural aspect of working with people from the Philippines because you are from the Philippines. So you've bridged the gap and hopefully then making that a lot more efficient and just better for each party, whether it's the VA or whether it's the investor that's hiring the VA.
Absolutely.
So your business started in lockdown. So you're a success story of lockdown.
You're absolutely right in terms of being placed right in the middle of property investors on one side and then Filipinos on the other. And in fact, will share with the world not the world, but your audience, how I discovered that culture plays a massive part in the issues that property investors regularly face when they work with virtual assistants from the Philippines. And hopefully that's what we will unpack today, how to troubleshoot these issues. And a lot of it comes from the fact that the Filipinos, they work to a culture that may be alien to property investors based here in the UK.
Yeah. So let's dive into that. So we've sort of said, top 5 mistakes that people make, and obviously there's more mistakes and there's lots of learnings along the way. But I guess there is a commonality of some of the things that people expect or that they do or that they don't do that means that the end result isn't quite what everyone was hoping for. So let's get started. What do you think is one of the big mistakes that people make?
I think the top mistake is thinking that hiring one VA can do everything for them. I've seen it as a very common, I would say, expectation of virtual assistants, that you bring them in and you can essentially delegate all of the tasks that you don't like doing in your business to one virtual assistant. And that's a strategy that ultimately will fail and backfire on the property investor, on the business owner, for a number of reasons. Number one, they depend on the one VA to do everything, and virtual assistants are humans, they're not robots. And ultimately, as humans, we are just not 100% dependable, no matter how much we try and no matter what the good intentions are of the VA. In fact, I think if right now you feel very lucky that you're working with a perfect VA, I would start rethinking that. How lucky are you really when your entire business processes rely on just the one VA?
Yeah, and I think you've made a really good point there. So VAs are human. We know as business owners that whilst we're generally quite good at all things, there are certain things that we're way better at. And there's certain things that we get by on and we can get them done, but we know that someone else can do it better. So bookkeeping, that's not everyone's jam, but if forced to, most business owners could probably muddle their way through it. And why would a VA be any different? Why would they be an expert bookkeeper, a fantastic social media person, and the best salesperson and lead generation? It's just not possible, is it?
No, and the thing is, in the Filipino culture, saying no is actually a very uncomfortable and difficult thing to do. It's not the best, but I'm not here to tell you go ahead and fix your VA, teach them how not to say no, but that's not a good strategy because that's decades of imprinting and cultural upbringing on the VA. So rather than trying to fix your VA and teach them to be more comfortable asserting themselves and saying yes, just work with that culture that's in front of you, that comes with your VA. So number one, expect that if you just ask them a yes or no question, that most likely they'll say yes, even though it's not really their intention and that's not the truthful answer. It's not that they're trying to be honest with you. It's that they don't know how to say no to you. So if you ask them, exactly, you ask them to do a task that they just don't have the skill for, or that in fact you've already given them 10 tasks and they're trying to just go through all of the things that you want them to do, and then you add another task on top of that, and you think, wow, this is great. My VA is not complaining. My VA is not saying no to me. Just think of that as maybe not such a good thing, because then your VA is in danger of going through overwhelm, going through being overworked, making mistakes, because they're now not focused on just one thing in your business. They're trying to do 3, 4, 5 things in your business. And that can just spell disaster for you.
And what's the likely outcome that you've seen, from experience of when that does happen? Someone overwhelms the VA with loads of different tasks, too many tasks to get done. What's that VA likely to do if they're a Filipino VA? I mean, I think I know, because having worked with a few VAs and visited your amazing country for quite a long time, I think I've got an idea, but why don't you tell us?
So if you go to YouTube, a really popular topic of videos that you can watch regarding Filipino VAs is the question, why do they disappear? And I think that would be the quick answer to your question. In the face of not being able to communicate to their clients, their boss, essentially, in the face of them being overwhelmed with a ton of work, in the face of them having committed quite a few mistakes trying to do everything, it's no surprise that their only solution that they feel is available to them is just not to show up. So one day your VA will just go cold on you. We call it AWOL, absent without leave, but it's just another way of saying that's it. You've been blocked by the VA. You can't contact them on WhatsApp. They're not to be seen on Messenger. Emails get ignored. And yes, unfortunately, that thing can happen.
Yeah. So top mistake number 1, searching for the ultimate unicorn. One person cannot do the whole thing for you. It's just not the way we're built, and they will try and do it until it becomes too much. And as you say, they will then go AWOL, and you'll be left going, what happened? What happened there? So what's the solution?
I would say the solution, as with a lot of things, probably prevention is better than having to deal with a really difficult situation later on. My mindset for working with VAs, number 1 is to not think of them as the solution. So it's not so much that you're hiring VAs to solve problems in your business, but that you hire VAs to operate on solutions. That you, as the business owner, it's on you to define and design these solutions for your business. We don't have to talk too technical and too intimidating, or use intimidating terms like systemizing your business. All it means is before you hire a VA, you think about the processes in your business that you would like someone else to take over, because you don't have the skill for it, you don't have the time for it, or maybe you just don't find the process or the task anything that gives back joy to you, like bookkeeping, for example. So think about the process instead of jumping into, let's find a VA to solve problems in my business. So I like to think of it as you're not recruiting and hiring a VA. What you're doing instead is you're outsourcing a process. So if you start from that, you think about the process before you think about looking for a VA, then you're approaching it from the point of view of leading rather than managing, because that's what's going to happen once you bring a VA in. You just end up creating a new job for yourself, which is you've turned yourself not into a business owner, but into a VA manager. But if you look at it from the point of view as you're outsourcing a process, first of all, you're defining what that process looks like, and you're clearly stating when does that process start and when does that process end. And it's not so much that the VA will take over the entire process. You're also defining from that process, where does the VA fit in? So for property investors, for example, this can be property acquisitions. That's one of the big things that property investors like to do. In order to grow their portfolio, they need to find more property deals. But a lot of property investors will think, oh, I need to find a VA to help me find property deals. Whereas a better rethinking of that question would be, how do I bring in a VA, or where does the VA fit in my property acquisitions process? If you think of it that way, then you understand that finding property deals isn't a one-step process. There's likely part A, which is marketing. So you're building a pipeline of landlords to contact, properties to reach out to, or send direct to vendor campaigns to. And then there's the second part, which is the sales and negotiation side, because you, as a educated property investor, you understand that to find the deal is you need to find the motivation. You need to find the pain point. You can't outsource that part of the process to a VA, but you can outsource the data scraping part, the time consuming and the repetitive parts of building a pipeline of landlords and to essentially market to and to reach out to. So that's a really specific example of thinking about working with VAs as outsourcing a process rather than recruiting and thinking, I can give 5 tasks today, 20 tasks tomorrow.
Cool. Okay. So I think that's a really good point. You start with the process and where that person can fit in. So you have to have your business, a good idea of how your business gets from A to B to have an outcome of C, and then where that person can fit in before you can actually recruit the right person for it. So top second mistake, Cristina, what's the next one that you see?
Using time tracking software when working with VAs. I understand the reason for why you would want to use a time tracking software, because the reality is there's a lot of dishonesty out there. And this is why I encourage small business owners and property investors to rethink working with VAs as outsourcing a process, because this helps you define the scope of work that the VA does. That is to say, you're not depending on the VA being honest with you all the time. If you know what process you're outsourcing to a virtual assistant, you can define that scope of work. You can design the routine for the VA, and you can manage your own expectations in terms of how long a task will take and the delivery of the work that the VA then presents to you. If you don't know this, then this is where you think that bringing in a time tracking software is the solution. It's not. It's the reaction to you not knowing your own business process. So I would say, do not turn yourself into a manager, because if you think that installing a time tracking software is how to deal with dishonest VAs, that's what a manager would do. A manager would install or present the solution of installing time tracking softwares on a VA's laptop, instead of preventing that from happening in the first place. Because if I know that if the VA's work involves, let's say, responding to tenant messages or repairs requests from tenants or doing guest check-in, I can say that thing, that process, that task will take 15 minutes in the morning, another 15 minutes in the middle of the day, another 15 minutes at the end of the day. So I've clearly defined and designed what the VA's routine will be. And the VA's responsibility is to report back to me if 15 minutes isn't enough, because maybe something has happened. They know will take longer than 15 minutes because it's not the usual messages that they receive. Then you've also created that workflow, that process to say, if this happens, you have to report back to me. So you're coming in there with not just a small business thinking, but thinking of you're leading what happens in your business. Another thing, using time tracking software creates a negative atmosphere, a negative landscape for working with your VA, because it's very transactional and it creates fear and distrust. And um, I've had this one situation before where I assigned a VA to a property investor who needed someone to do rent checks. What the VA did was he created a very smart Excel spreadsheet to systemize tracking the rent. And what happened was he reduced his time from, let's say, spending 8 hours a week or 10 hours a week just chasing all of the tenants and their rent, into a process that really took, I don't know, 4 hours, or essentially just half the time. And the response of that property investor was he felt that the VA had deceived him in the number of hours that he was charging the VA for. Whereas what the VA's actually done, if that were a consultant that he brought in to create a system, or a smarter process of chasing rent, instead he looked at it in a very transactional manner. And needless to say, we stopped working with that client because all he could think about, time tracking software shows this, whereas actually all the work was delivered not just on time, but that VA has created immense value for this property investor that really just costed him £5 an hour. So that's one thing to think about for property investors. Don't think like a manager, think like a leader of your own business.
Yeah, it's the outcome that matters, isn't it? And making sure that that is a successful outcome, and the route to get there is less important, as long as it works. Okay, fantastic. So some really good insights there, I think, for people that are considering, taking on a VA, especially potentially from the Philippines, because you've got some really practical nuggets of wisdom there that you can actually start to implement into your business, and any briefing that you do from here on in. So number 3, what are we on to next?
Communicating with your VA. So we now know culturally that Filipino VAs are not very assertive. And if you ask them a yes or no question, most likely you'll get a yes, even though that doesn't match with what the actual reality is. One strategy that property investors can implement is what's called the LBs and NTs. Now that stands for like best and next time. And usually business owners think of this as a communication from them to the VA, but you can also think of it as inviting the VA to communicate back to you what's on their head. What do they think about the work that's happening? What do they think about the tenants that they're dealing with? What do they think about this new thing that we're introducing to the business, like a new CRM software or a new Facebook ad campaign that we're bringing out? Because they have thoughts too. They just don't know how to communicate it back to you because, again, culturally, they're just not assertive. Even a very extrovert Filipino in Western standards or British standards will still appear very much shy and demure and introvert. So using the LBs and NTs is a way of encouraging more open and honest communication between you and the VAs, and the VA, and between the VAs and the rest of your team members, and maybe your clients, your tenants as well. So LBs, as mentioned earlier, it stands for like best. That is to say, you always start with or on the positive. So you invite, what do you like best about? And then whatever that issue is, what do you like best about this week's workload? What do you like best about our campaign? What do you like best about this new CRM system? That invites the VA a structure in which to provide and communicate and unpack what they're thinking. And the second part of that conversation is next time. So it's not so much that you're talking about something negative or you're talking about criticism or mistakes. You're instead inviting everyone to talk about what can we do to improve on whatever the issue is. So like best and next times is a really practical and easy to remember tool that property investors can use when they go into meetings and huddles with their VAs.
I love that. I think that is a really good way of thinking of it. And actually, do you know what? I think I could probably use that on the kids as well, if I'm honest.
No, that's absolutely true. You can also use it on yourself, just if you're doing your own business sit down strategizing and business reflections. What do you like best about what's happening in your business right now? And what can you do next time to improve on things? So yes, absolutely. I love that strategy as well.
It's using the right language to keep the doors open and just get the best out of everybody, isn't it? So really powerful. I love that. So back onto that communication then. So we've got the framework, which is the like, best, and next time. Is there a particular method of communication? So is it a face-to-face Zooms? Is it the WhatsApps? Is it the Slack huddles? Is there a particular thing that works best, if you found?
Okay, I like that question because ultimately while you want some sort of feedback from the VA, what they feel most comfortable doing, it also doesn't mean that the VA dictates how you run your business. So personally, I think for day-to-day work communication, I find that instant messaging platforms work best because you get immediate response. Also, functionalities like you can upload files, photos, and tag people. That's also very useful. Compared to emails, we all know that email is now the new snail mail. So we tend to think of emails as a very formal way of communicating with somebody, and it's there to document and record an official communication. So we don't tend to use that for immediate communication with anybody, with somebody. So with VAs, I would say daily work, use instant messaging platforms. WhatsApp is very popular. Formal documentation, absolutely bring it to emails, especially when CCing suppliers or tenants and clients, that sort of thing. And then I would recommend that you do at least one small huddle or very brief huddle with your VA. Absolutely. I would imagine maybe 15 minutes should be enough. And to really maximize that 15 minutes, you can do the first 5 minutes as the LBs and NTs, because that helps everyone to understand what the next 10 minutes should be spent on. But do keep it to a minimum, because again, the VAs, they tend to not feel as comfortable doing videos, do too many frequent videos, because what property investors will find during video calls with the VA is that the VA thinks of it as, I'm going to sit here and listen to you because you have something to tell me. They don't think of it as, this is a meeting where we're all going to be open and things on the table. The VAs do not think that that's what video calls are for. They think this is a one-sided meeting, and very much they think of seniority and hierarchy, and they are the VA and you're the boss. So this isn't a time for me to tell you what I'm thinking. And that's why I invite the LBs and NTs during small team huddles with your VA.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. Again, like just little ways of thinking of something, which when you bring your mindset to something, you're like, well, yeah, no, we'll get together and we'll brainstorm this. And that's not how they're thinking whatsoever. So, and you're probably putting them on edge, probably thinking, is this a test?
Exactly. And the other thing that's not just cultural, that VAs find uncomfortable when going into video calls would be the fact that in the Philippines, the VA lives in a country where there isn't a lot of good infrastructure. So they might feel uncomfortable about their home, for example. Yes, you can put in blurred backgrounds and virtual backgrounds. There's not a lot that they can do about living in a small cramped space with dogs barking and children crying, and they live next to a really busy street because they live in a crowded urban area, which you're hiring a VA from a third world, and that's just their reality. So keeping video calls to a minimum is not just about thinking that the VA's culture is that they're not assertive and they're not chatty, but it's also thinking about what is the VA's physical situation like, and
Yeah, I don't
you
want to make them uncomfortable.
exactly, then you'll understand why it's not always the best idea to keep requesting the VA to jump on calls with you.
Great points there. So we are on to number 4.
Right. So, point number 4 in terms of what property investors can do better when it comes to working with VAs is to put guardrails in place to avoid and deal with absenteeism, because that's another thing that happens quite frequently with VAs. Now, there are 2 situations or instances where VAs can ask for days off and leaves. One is when there is no notice from the VA, so they just don't turn up. And it's not so much like the previous issue where they've completely ghosted you and disappeared. This is just instances where you've noticed the VA doesn't attend meetings, or the VA didn't show up to a call that you prearranged with them, or that the VA didn't log in as you expect them to do so, because that's their schedule and that's their routine. And then the second instance is when the VA keeps requesting for leave. So this is leaves with notice, whereas the previous one is that the VA just frequently not show up during scheduled meetings and calls. I would say that as a property investor and as a business owner, you need to put guardrails in place. And the easiest one to put in place is never pay your VA upfront. Always pay your VA after the service has been provided. Typically, your options are paying every 15 days, paying weekly, or paying monthly. But the point stands that you should only ever pay the VA after they've done work. So it's not so much that because they've been absent that you don't pay them their salary, but it helps you prevent a situation where you've already paid the VA and they don't show up for work. The second strategy that property investors fail to utilize more often is using tandem VAs. So a tandem VA is where you hire 2 VAs to look after the same process. They don't necessarily show up at the same time. The point of hiring tandem VAs is that they work through shifts, and this works really well. And this works best for property investors who deal with guests for their service accommodation business, deal with rental properties like HMOs and buy-to-lets, because what this does is if you have a VA that is genuinely ill or unable to show up to work, then you know that you've got another VA who's trained in the same process that can cover for the VA who's not able to show up for work.
Yeah.
Property investors think this is just extra cost for me. But the thing is, it's not, because you have defined what the process is going to be. You have defined the routine and the number of hours. You are simply allocating one set of hours to one VA and another set of hours to another VA. So the cost is exactly the same to you as a business owner, but you created a system in place where you're never left dry and unable to continue your business operations because your VA didn't show up for work that day,
Yeah.
regardless of whether the VA has a genuine reason or not.
Exactly. It's a good fail-safe way of operating, isn't it? And as you say, it's whether they intentionally didn't turn up or whether it was something that's happened, like a power cut or, rainy season, if the storms come through and they're unable to work for whatever reason. So, excellent point. And again, so it's about putting those, as you say, those guardrails in place just to protect your business. Amazing. So we're coming up to the last big mistake, the last big issue that could happen. Obviously, there's a few more, but these are the most common ones. What's the last one we're going to talk about, Cristina?
I would say hiring incompetent VAs. And it's not so much that is the issue. Yes, it is an issue, but it's more thinking that it was the VA's fault and not their fault. So we're coming full circle now. We're going back to the first issue about essentially thinking of VAs as a magic wand, as a one brush solution for the issues and frustrations that you have in your business. So when a property investor discovers that they've hired and that they're working with a very hair pulling, incompetent VA, that they must think, oh my God, it's the VA's fault. They don't know how to do this task, which is, it could be, finding a property deal for them. They don't know how to deal with guests or tenants. That's all well and true that you have probably, unfortunately, brought into your business a VA that's unskilled and incompetent. However, I also would like property investors and small business owners to look at themselves and think, what did I do wrong in this situation? How am I also responsible for what happened here? Again, I'd go back to thinking of working with VAs as outsourcing a process rather than finding the perfect VA or the dream VA. So when you start thinking about working with VAs as outsourcing process, then you start sitting down, inspecting your business, really reflecting how and what happens, what takes place in your business, and identifying roles and you could say departments within your business that need to run. You might be a small business, you might be a solopreneur, but your business still functions the way large corporations do. You have, or you can identify a finance department within your solopreneur operation. This is where you started thinking about hiring a VA in the first place, because you're trying to do all of these distinct departments, which are really distinct operations in your business, while being a solopreneur. And inviting one VA to replicate that doesn't really solve the original issue in the first place. So it's not so much that you've hired an incompetent VA, but you have looked at it, at the recruitment process, the wrong way around. So start with yourself, start with looking at your business and looking at the various operations. You don't need to plug in a VA for all of these operations all at once. You could think of outsourcing as itself as a process. So you can look at what's the most business tasks that need attending to. It can be a backlog of bookkeeping transactions that need combing through, right? So let's get started with that. Or it can be you being unable to attend to all of the check-in messages from guests on a daily basis and having to deal with booking cleaners or doing refunds.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's if the way that you currently do business is all in your head. It's a little bit chaotic because your mind's running at 1,000 miles per hour. And then you hire someone because they're good at customer service and you've got an SA business. You can't just expect them on day one to pick up the jumbled mess in your head, make sense of it, make it their own, and get the outcome that you're expecting. You know, there is an onboarding, and your business has to be in a reasonably good shape, process and systems wise, for someone else to be able to take it on. And I guess, you know, that's really important, but equally, that's kind of where your role stands in a little bit, isn't it? Because we've gone through some of the top 5 issues that you could have, you know, the top mistakes that you could make with a VA. A lot of them have been around communication, which is no big surprise. But your role, Cristina, as that kind of middle person between the client, the investor, and then the VAs, you know, you're helping and facilitating that a little bit as well, aren't you?
What people think I am is just a person who finds VAs for them. But what I'm actually doing for property investors, the real value that I provide for them is to, first of all, think about what they really need a VA for and address that. So in a way, I'm unpacking the frustrations that the property investor is experiencing. It's not that they need a VA. The need for a VA is like the symptom of a problem and not the problem itself. So that's where I come in. Because if it was just up to the property investor thinking, I need a VA because the VA will do all of this. I've heard so-and-so property investor and their VA did wonders for them. So the same thing is going to happen to me. And then they get all of these problems and frustrations and troubles with the VA because they went straight ahead and just shopped for a VA without looking at understanding what in their business is, well, needs attending to, rather than just thinking, you know, it's like they look at the VA as a band-aid, whereas I help them look at what can we put in place first before we hire a VA, before we plug in a VA.
Process is up and running, and you know, you're working with a VA and yourself. You're also there to help with cultural communication, which you might forget as an investor when you're in a big rush and you might just throw a command at someone and, you know, it doesn't fall right and the outcome doesn't happen. You're there to look at that as well, aren't you? And just facilitate that communication thing.
Absolutely. I'm there virtually. So within the WhatsApp communications that get set up between the VA and the property investor, I'm within that group, that chat group. It's not so much that I get involved with the day-to-day work and instructions. It's for me to just oversee what's happening and to be able to, in a way, translate the business owner's instructions to the VA, wherein the VA will be able to understand exactly what the property investor wants to happen. Or if I'm not able to unpack it myself, that I approach the property investor to clarify if the VA, if I can see that the VA is not doing that and the VA is simply saying yes to the instructions coming through.
Yeah, so it's that back from the VA to the investor of you're able to actually see, is that outside of job scope? If it is, let's talk to the investor and say, look, this VA is amazing at this, but they may not be as good at what you're asking them to do here. So let's look at another solution.
Precisely that.
Perfect. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you today, Cristina. I think you have given us some really practical tips and tricks, actually, and some insights into working with VAs. I think a lot of people probably think, oh, yeah, I'll just nip on to Fiverr, nip on to Upwork, or, you know, use a recruitment specialist for the Philippines and find someone and it will all be great and my business is going to be thriving whilst I'm playing golf. And there's a little bit more prep work than that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And there's quite a few shocks and surprises there for the property investor who's just thinking about VAs to solve everything for them.
Yeah, but they can be a really invaluable part of the business if you do it right, and you follow some of the tips and tricks that Christina's given us today. So, Cristina, how can people get in touch with you if they are looking to onboard some VAs?
They can visit my website. It's thepropertyva.co.uk. I'm also on all of the socials, on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just look for my name, Cristina Osborne, readily available to have a conversation and have a chat with anyone who's thinking about working with VAs but don't know where to start. Or perhaps they're already working with a VA and experiencing some of the issues that we talked about in this episode, and let's see how we can troubleshoot what's happening with your VA.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And hopefully that's been of use.
Thank you so much again, Sarah.